The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Saint Elmo, Colorado, as Zara Valentine clutched her tattered suitcase to her chest and ran for her life. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting long shadows across the wooden boardwalks of the mining town as she darted between buildings, her heart pounding against her ribs like a desperate prisoner seeking escape. It was 1883, and Zara had never imagined her life would come to this, fleeing from two men who claimed her late father had sold her hand in marriage to settle a gambling debt. Behind her, she could hear the heavy footfalls of the Blackburn brothers, notorious for their ruthless debt collection methods throughout Colorado territory. "You can't run forever, Valentine," shouted the elder Blackburn, his voice carrying on the warm summer breeze. "Your pa signed the papers fair and square." Zara's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, her dark auburn hair coming loose from its pins. At 22, she had spent the last 3 years caring for her ailing father, watching him slowly succumb to consumption. She never imagined that in his desperation, he would gamble away the only thing of value he had left her future. The train station loomed ahead, her only hope of escape. The Northern Pacific would be departing for Denver in less than 10 minutes. If she could just board that train, she might find a way to start anew. Zara burst onto the platform, her green eyes frantically scanning for assistance. The few passengers waiting paid her little mind. Saint Elmo had seen its share of peculiar happenings since silver was discovered in the nearby hills. A woman running was hardly cause for concern. There she is. The younger Blackburn's voice cut through the station's ambient noise. Before Zara could reach the passenger car, rough hands seized her arms. The Blackburn brothers had caught up, their faces red with exertion and anger. "You've led us on quite a chase, Miss Valentine," said Harvey Blackburn, the elder brother with a jagged scar running down his cheek. "But it ends here. You're coming north with us to Leadville. Mr. Thornton is an impatient man, and your wedding won't wait another day." "I never agreed to this." Zara struggled against their grip, her voice rising with desperation. "My father had no right." "Rights don't matter when there's a signed contract," smirked Walter Blackburn, the younger but burlier of the two. "Now stop your squirming before we have to get rough." They began forcing her up the steps of the northbound train, one man on each arm. Zara fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, her boots skidding against the metal steps as passengers turned to watch the commotion. "Help me," she cried out, but the onlookers merely shook their heads and turned away. In these parts, a debt was a debt, and few would interfere with the Blackburn brothers' business. Just as they reached the door of the passenger car, a tall figure stepped out from within, blocking their path. The man wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, a dusty Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His stance was casual, but there was nothing relaxed about the way his hand rested near the Colt revolver at his hip. "No." The word was spoken softly, but with such firm conviction that both Blackburn brothers paused. "Mind your business, Cowboy," spat Harvey. "This woman belongs to our employer." The stranger tilted his head, revealing a square jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. His eyes, a piercing blue beneath the brim of his hat, assessed the situation in seconds. "People don't belong to other people," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "So I reckon the lady stays right here in Saint Elmo if that's what she wants." Zara felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. The stranger stood unwavering, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. "You know who we work for?" Walter growled, his grip tightening painfully on Zara's arm. "Jeremiah Thornton owns half the mining claims in Leadville." "You don't want to cross him." "Don't know him," the cowboy replied, "and don't much care to. Now let the lady go." Harvey released Zara's arm to reach for his pistol, but the cowboy was faster. In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt and leveled it at Harvey's chest. "I wouldn't," he advised calmly. "I'm not looking to spill blood today, but I will if you force my hand." A tense silence fell over the platform. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice now backed away, seeking shelter from the potential shootout. Walter, seeing his brother outdrawn, released Zara's other arm. "This ain't over," he warned. For today it is, the cowboy replied. He gestured with his gun for them to back down the steps. Miss, you might want to step behind me. Zara didn't need to be told twice. She quickly moved to stand behind her unexpected savior, her heart still racing but now from something beyond fear. The Blackburn brothers retreated, their faces twisted with rage. Thornton will hear about this, Harvey called back as they reached the platform. You've just made a powerful enemy, stranger. Wouldn't be my first, the cowboy responded evenly, keeping his gun trained on them until they disappeared around the corner of the station. Only when they were out of sight did he holster his weapon and turn to Zara. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun and the faint scar that crossed his left eyebrow. Are you hurt, madam? He asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. No, thanks to you, Zara replied, trying to regain her composure. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Garrett. Griffin Garrett, he replied, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. And no thanks needed, couldn't stand by and watch two men force a woman onto a train against her will. Zara Valentine, she introduced herself, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. Those men, they work for a man my father supposedly promised me to before he died. I never agreed to it. Griffin nodded, his expression darkening. A man's debts are his own. They shouldn't fall to his daughter. The train whistle blew, signaling the imminent departure. Around them, the last passengers were boarding, casting curious glances their way. You still planning to leave Saint Elmo? Griffin asked, nodding toward the train. Zara hesitated, looking at the northbound train that would have taken her unwillingly to a future she dreaded. I can't stay here, she said finally. They'll come back, and next time you might not be around to stop them. Griffin considered this, replacing his hat. Fair point. Where were you hoping to go instead? I have a distant cousin in Denver, Zara admitted. I was hoping she might take me in until I can find work. Griffin glanced at the station clock. The southbound train to Denver doesn't leave until tomorrow morning. Oh. Zara's face fell as the reality of her situation sank in. She had nowhere to stay, little money, and two angry debt collectors likely waiting for her to leave the station. Griffin seemed to read her thoughts. I know a place you can stay for the night, Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable boarding house near the edge of town. I'm sure she'd have a room available. Zara looked at him uncertainly. She had learned to be wary of men offering help, especially in mining towns where respectable women were few. As if sensing her hesitation, Griffin added, I'll walk you there and make sure you're settled, then be on my way. You have my word as a gentleman. There was something in his steady gaze that made Zara believe him. Perhaps it was the way he had stepped forward when others turned away, or how he spoke to her with respect rather than pity. Thank you, Mr. Garrett, she said finally. I would appreciate that. Griffin nodded and picked up her suitcase. Stay close to me. Saint Elmo might be small, but the Blackburns could be anywhere. Together they left the station, stepping into the late afternoon sunlight. Griffin led her down a side street to avoid the main thoroughfare, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. You're not from Saint Elmo, are you? Zara asked as they walked, trying to distract herself from the fear that the Blackburns might reappear. No, madam, just passing through on my way south. I've been working cattle drives up in Montana territory, heading back to Texas for the winter. You're a long way from Texas, Zara observed. Griffin smiled slightly. A cowboy goes where the work is, been that way since I was 16. 12 years on the trail teaches a man to be comfortable wherever his hat hangs. 28, Zara noted mentally. He carried himself like someone older, with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen his share of hardship. As they turned onto a quieter residential street lined with modest homes, Zara caught sight of a two-story building with a small, well-kept garden in front. A hand-painted sign read Henderson Boarding House. Mrs. Henderson is a widow, Griffin explained as they approached. Her husband was a mining engineer, died in a collapse 3 years back. She's been running this place ever since. Before they reached the gate, the front door opened, and a plump woman with silver-streaked hair stepped onto the porch. Her sharp eyes took in the unlikely pair approaching her home. Griffin Garrett, is that you? she called out, her face breaking into a warm smile. I thought you'd moved on to greener pastures. Good afternoon, Mrs. Henderson, Griffin replied, removing his hat again. I've been away, but I find myself in Saint Elmo again. This is Miss Valentine. She's in need of a room for the night if you have one available. Mrs. Henderson's gaze shifted to Zara, taking in her rumpled appearance and the wariness in her eyes. Something in the older woman's expression softened. Of course I have room, she said, gesturing them inside. Any friend of Griffin's is welcome here. Once inside the cozy parlor, Griffin briefly explained Zara's situation, careful to maintain her dignity while conveying the danger she faced. Mrs. Henderson's face hardened at the mention of the Blackburn brothers. Vultures, those two. They've brought nothing but trouble to this town since they arrived. She turned to Zara with motherly concern. You'll be safe here, dear. No one causes trouble at my establishment, not if they want to remain in the good graces of half the town. Relief washed over Zara. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I can pay for the room. We'll discuss that later, the older woman said, waving away Zara's concern. For now, you look like you could use a hot meal and some rest. As Mrs. Henderson led Zara to her room on the second floor, Griffin remained in the parlor. When they returned downstairs, he was standing by the window, watching the street with vigilant eyes. I should be going, he said, placing his hat back on his head. Train leaves early tomorrow, Miss Valentine. I'll come by to escort you to the station. That's very kind, Zara began, but I couldn't ask you to. You didn't ask, Griffin interrupted gently. I offered. Those Blackburn boys won't give up easily. I'd sleep better knowing you made it safely to Denver. There was something in his voice, a sincerity that cut through Zara's defenses. After years of caring for her father and fending for herself, accepting help didn't come easily. But here was a man who had already risked himself for her once, asking to do so again. Thank you, she said simply. Griffin nodded, bid Mrs. Henderson good evening and stepped out into the gathering dusk. Zara watched from the window as he walked away, his tall figure gradually blending into the shadows of the small mountain town. He's a good man, that Griffin Garrett, Mrs. Henderson said, coming to stand beside her. Not many like him left these days. You know him well, Zara asked, curious about her mysterious rescuer. He passes through Saint Elmo every few years, keeps to himself mostly, but he's always been respectful and fair. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. Helped my late husband repair the roof once, refused payment except for meals. That tells you something about a man's character. Zara nodded, still watching the spot where Griffin had disappeared. Yes, I suppose it does. Later that evening, after a satisfying meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Zara sat in the small but comfortable room Mrs. Henderson had provided. The older woman had lent her a nightgown and robe, as well as some toiletries. For the first time since her father's death 2 weeks ago, Zara felt something close to safe. She moved to the window and gazed out at the mountains surrounding Saint Elmo. The mining town was nestled in a valley, with towering peaks on all sides. In the fading light, they looked like sentinels standing guard, yet even their imposing presence couldn't keep out men like the Blackburns. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Zara, dear, Mrs. Henderson's voice called softly, may I come in? Of course, Zara replied, tightening the robe around her slender frame. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Henderson carrying a steaming cup of tea. I thought you might have trouble sleeping after today's excitement. Thank you, Zara accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the soothing aroma of chamomile. Mrs. Henderson settled into the room's single armchair, her kind face showing concern. Now that we're alone, I hope you don't mind my asking what brought you to such dire circumstances. Zara hesitated only briefly before sitting on the edge of the bed. There was something about Mrs. Henderson that inspired trust, much like Griffin had. My father was once a successful merchant in Central City, she began, but after my mother died, he sought comfort in gambling and drink. I didn't realize how bad things had gotten until he fell ill 3 years ago. She took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. I spent everything we had left on doctors, but consumption is unforgiving. Before he died, he must have made some arrangement with Jeremiah Thornton, a businessman in Leadville. The Blackburn brothers showed up at our home the day after the funeral with a contract bearing my father's signature. It promised my hand in marriage to Thornton in exchange for canceling a $5,000 gambling debt. Mrs. Henderson's expression darkened. That's not a contract, that's indentured servitude. No court would uphold such a thing. Perhaps not, Zara agreed, but the Blackburns don't seem concerned with legalities. They gave me 3 days to pack my belongings before they would escort me to Leadville. I sold what little we had left and fled instead. And you came to Saint Elmo? Zara shook her head. I was heading to Denver but had to change trains here. I never expected them to follow me so quickly. Mrs. Henderson reached over and patted Zara's hand. Well, they'll find no welcome in my home. And with Griffin keeping an eye out, you'll be on that train to Denver before they can cause any more trouble. Zara smiled gratefully, though doubt lingered. I just hope my cousin will take me in. We've never met, but she's my only remaining family. And if she cannot, Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Then I'll find work, Zara said with determination. I'm educated, I can read, write, and keep accounts. My mother insisted I learn, even when my father thought it unnecessary for a girl. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. A wise woman, your mother. Education is never wasted. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow we'll be here before you know it. After Mrs. Henderson left, Zara finished her tea and climbed into bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the moment on the train steps when all seemed lost, and then Griffin Garrett appeared, his quiet no changing the course of her life. She wondered where he was staying tonight, if he too lay awake thinking of their chance encounter. The thought brought an unexpected warmth to her cheeks, and she chided herself for such fanciful musings. Tomorrow he would see her safely onto the Denver train, and their paths would diverge forever. She would be foolish to dwell on a kindness that was likely just the natural decency of a passing stranger. With that sobering thought, Zara finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware of the figure watching the boarding house from the shadows across the street. Dawn broke over Saint Elmo with the promise of a clear day. Zara woke early, having slept fitfully. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn dress she'd arrived in, wishing she had something fresher to wear for her journey. Her father's gambling had cost them nearly everything. The few possessions in her suitcase were all she had left in the world. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Henderson already preparing breakfast. The aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the cozy kitchen. "Good morning, dear," the older woman greeted her warmly. Hungry, famished, Zara admitted, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal in days before last night's stew. As they ate, Mrs. Henderson kept glancing at the clock on the wall. Griffin should be here soon. The train leaves at 8:30. You've both been so kind, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Live well and be happy, Mrs. Henderson replied simply. That's payment enough. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Henderson rose to answer it, but instead of Griffin's tall frame in the doorway, they saw the town marshal, a graying man with a weathered face and tired eyes. Morning, Edith, he said to Mrs. Henderson. Sorry to disturb your breakfast, but I need a word with Miss Valentine. Zara felt her heart sink. Had the Blackburns involved the law now? Come in, Thomas, Mrs. Henderson said, though her tone was noticeably cooler than before. What's this about? Marshal Thomas Cooper stepped into the kitchen, removing his hat. Got a complaint from 2 men saying this young lady is in breach of contract. They're demanding I bring her to the station for questioning. That's preposterous, Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. They're trying to force her to marry a man she's never met to settle her father's gambling debts. Surely you don't consider that a legitimate contract? The marshal looked uncomfortable. Ordinarily, no, but they've got papers with signatures and Jeremiah Thornton's got influence with the territorial judge. He turned to Zara. I'm not here to arrest you, miss. Just thought I'd give you fair warning. Those men are determined. Zara's appetite vanished. Where are they now? Waiting at my office, Cooper replied. I told them I'd look into the matter, but they're getting impatient. One of them mentioned catching the 9 o'clock northbound if things weren't resolved by then. The same train Griffin mentioned yesterday, Mrs. Henderson murmured. Griffin Garrett, the marshal asked, his bushy eyebrows rising. He's mixed up in this. He stopped them from forcing Miss Valentine onto the train yesterday, Mrs. Henderson explained. He's supposed to escort her to the southbound train this morning. Cooper rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Griffin's a good man, but he's made enemies. If he's involved, those Blackburn boys might think twice. He put his hat back on. I'll stall them as long as I can, but you'd best be on that train when it leaves, Miss Valentine. After the marshal left, Zara pushed away her half-eaten breakfast. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door, Mrs. Henderson. Nonsense, the older woman replied firmly. The trouble was already on your heels when you arrived. Now finish your breakfast. You'll need your strength. They had just finished clearing the dishes when another knock came at the door. This time, Mrs. Henderson's smile confirmed their visitor before she opened it. Griffin Garrett stood on the porch, looking as if he hadn't slept much better than Zara. He'd shaved, though, and his clothes appeared fresher than the day before. Morning, ladies, he greeted them, hat in hand. Ready for your journey, Miss Valentine? Zara nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at the sight of him. Marshal Cooper was just here. The Blackburns have involved the law. Griffin's jaw tightened. I figured they might. All the more reason to get you on that train. Do you have everything? Zara retrieved her suitcase from upstairs while Mrs. Henderson packed a small basket of food for her journey. When she returned, the two were speaking in low voices by the door. They fell silent as she approached, but something in their expressions made her uneasy. Is something wrong? She asked. Griffin and Mrs. Henderson exchanged a glance before he answered. Just discussing the safest route to the station. I think we should avoid Main Street. Zara suspected there was more to it, but didn't press the issue. After a heartfelt goodbye to Mrs. Henderson, with promises to write once she was settled in Denver, she and Griffin set off toward the station. They took a circuitous route, keeping to side streets and alleyways. Griffin carried her suitcase in one hand, his other never straying far from his holstered pistol. They walked in silence for several minutes before Zara worked up the courage to voice the question that had been haunting her since the previous day. Why are you helping me, Mr. Garrett? You don't know me. You could have just minded your own business and continued on your way. Griffin didn't break stride, but she saw him considering her question carefully. My pa had a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. I've seen plenty of folks look the other way when something isn't right. Promised myself I wouldn't be one of them. It was a noble sentiment, but Zara sensed there was more to it. Is that the only reason? Griffin glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Let's just say I recognize the look of someone running from something they didn't choose. Had that look myself once. Before Zara could ask what he meant, they rounded a corner and the train station came into view. The platform was busier than the previous day, with passengers boarding both the northbound and southbound trains. Griffin's pace slowed, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the crowd. Stay close, he murmured, moving slightly in front of her. Zara followed his gaze and froze. Standing near the ticket office were the Blackburn brothers, their attention focused on a piece of paper in Harvey's hand. They hadn't noticed Griffin and Zara yet. They're watching for us, Griffin said quietly. We need to get you on that train without them seeing. How? Zara whispered, fear gripping her anew. They're right by the ticket office. Griffin thought for a moment, then handed her a small envelope. Your ticket to Denver. I purchased it last night. Zara opened the envelope, surprised to find a first-class ticket inside. Mr. Garrett, this is too much. I can't accept. You can and you will, he interrupted firmly. Now listen carefully. The southbound train is on the far track. I'm going to create a distraction that will draw their attention. When I do, you circle around behind the water tower and board from the far side of the train. Find your seat and stay there. Don't look back no matter what you hear. What kind of distraction? Zara asked, alarmed by the determination in his voice. The kind that guarantees you'll get away, he replied cryptically. Promise me you'll get on that train. Zara wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't worth risking himself for her again, but the intensity in his blue eyes stopped her. "I promise," she said instead. Griffin nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, wait for my signal." He stepped away from her, moving toward the center of the platform with confident strides, no longer attempting to hide. Zara remained in the shadows of the station building, her heart pounding as she watched him approach the Blackburn brothers. "Morning, gentlemen," Griffin called out, his voice carrying across the platform. "Looking for someone." Both brothers whirled around, their expressions darkening when they recognized him. Walter reached for his gun, but Harvey stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Where's the girl, Cowboy?" Harvey demanded. "Safe," Griffin replied, coming to a stop several yards away from them, and staying that way. "This isn't your concern," Harvey said, his voice deceptively calm. "We have legal documentation and the marshal's backing. Stand aside and we'll forget yesterday's unpleasantness." Griffin laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Legal. Forcing a woman to marry against her will to pay a debt. No court in this territory would uphold that contract, and you know it." As the confrontation escalated, drawing the attention of everyone on the platform, Zara began edging toward the water tower as Griffin had instructed. The southbound train stood ready on the far track, steam billowing from its engine. "Last chance, Garrett," Walter growled, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Walk away now." "Can't do that," Griffin replied, his stance shifting subtly. "Miss Valentine deserves the freedom to choose her own path." That was when Walter made his move, drawing his pistol in a swift motion. But Griffin was faster, his Colt already in hand. A shot rang out, echoing across the platform as passengers scrambled for cover. Walter howled in pain, his gun clattering to the wooden platform as he clutched his bleeding hand. Harvey reached for his own weapon, but Griffin had him covered before he could clear leather. "I wouldn't," Griffin advised, his voice deadly quiet. "I aimed for his hand because I don't want blood on my conscience. Next shot won't be so merciful." From her position behind the water tower, Zara could see the standoff but couldn't hear the words exchanged. She hesitated, torn between her promise to Griffin and her reluctance to leave him facing two dangerous men alone. The train whistle blew, announcing imminent departure. It was now or never. With a silent prayer for Griffin's safety, Zara hurried along the far side of the train, found an open door to a passenger car, and climbed aboard. She made her way to her assigned seat in the first-class section, her hands trembling as she stored her suitcase. Through the window, she could still see Griffin holding the Blackburn brothers at gunpoint. Other passengers were giving them a wide berth, though she noticed Marshal Cooper pushing his way through the crowd, his hand on his own weapon. The train lurched forward, beginning its journey south. Zara pressed her palm against the glass, watching as the platform began to slide away. At the last moment, Griffin turned his head toward her departing train, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met across the distance, and he gave her a small nod before returning his attention to the Blackburns. Then the train rounded a bend and the station disappeared from view. Zara sat back in her seat, a mixture of relief and concern washing over her. She was free from the Blackburns and their employer, heading toward what she hoped would be a new beginning in Denver. But what of Griffin? Would the marshal arrest him? Would the Blackburns seek revenge, and why did the thought of never seeing him again fill her with such unexpected sadness? The train picked up speed as it left Saint Elmo behind, the rhythmic clacking of wheels on rails providing a soothing backdrop to Zara's turbulent thoughts. Mountains rose on either side of the tracks, their majestic peaks indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Zara tried to focus on what lay ahead. Her cousin, Elizabeth, lived in a respectable neighborhood in Denver according to the last correspondence Zara's father had received years ago. Would she welcome a destitute relative appearing on her doorstep? What if she turned Zara away? These practical concerns should have occupied her mind entirely, yet her thoughts kept returning to Griffin Garrett, his quiet strength, the integrity that compelled him to help a stranger, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he almost smiled. Hours passed as the train wound its way south through the Rocky Mountains. Zara nibbled at the food Mrs. Henderson had packed, but her appetite was diminished by worry. The other passengers in the first-class car occasionally glanced curiously at the young woman traveling alone, but none intruded on her solitude. As afternoon turned to evening, the train began its approach to Denver. The mountains gradually gave way to foothills, and then to the sprawling city beside the South Platte River. Electric lights were just beginning to illuminate the streets as Zara gathered her belongings. Denver Union Station was a bustle of activity when the train finally pulled in. Porters rushed to assist disembarking passengers, while friends and family waited to greet their loved ones. Zara stepped onto the platform, momentarily overwhelmed by the size and noise of the city. She had the address of her cousin's home tucked safely in her reticule, along with the meager funds remaining from the sale of her father's possessions. Enough for a handsome cab, perhaps, but not much more. As she was considering her next move, a voice called out from behind her. "Miss Valentine." Zara turned, her heart leaping with irrational hope, but it wasn't Griffin. Instead, a uniformed porter approached, holding a telegram. "Are you Miss Zara Valentine?" he asked. "Yes," she confirmed, puzzled. "How did you know to find me?" The porter handed her the yellow paper. "Wire came in about an hour ago, said to look for a young lady arriving on the southbound from Saint Elmo. You're the only one matching the description." Zara thanked him and opened the telegram with trembling fingers. "Miss Valentine, stop Blackburn's detained by Marshal Cooper. Stop evidence of forgery discovered in contract. Stop, you are safe to return if desired. Stop will await your reply at Saint Elmo Station. Tomorrow stop." Griffin Garrett relief flooded through her. Griffin was safe and the Blackburn scheme had been exposed. But return to Saint Elmo? What would be the point? She had no home there, no prospects, nothing but the memory of a frightening ordeal and a brief connection with a cowboy who had already done more than enough for a stranger. No, she would stick to her original plan. Find her cousin, seek employment, build a new life far from the shadow of her father's mistakes. With renewed determination, Zara hired a handsome cab and provided the driver with her cousin's address. As they traveled through Denver's wide streets, she marveled at the city's growth. Gas lamps and the newer electric lights illuminated grand buildings of brick and stone, a far cry from the wooden structures of mining towns like Saint Elmo. The cab eventually turned into a neighborhood of substantial homes, each set back from the street behind neat gardens. They stopped before a 3-story house with a wrap-around porch, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Zara paid the driver, using nearly the last of her money, and approached the front door with trepidation. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a distinguished man in his 50s, his hair silvered at the temples. "May I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone polite but reserved. "I'm looking for Elizabeth Morgan," Zara replied. "She's my cousin. My name is Zara Valentine." The man's expression didn't change. "I regret to inform you that Mrs. Morgan no longer resides here. The Morgan family relocated to Boston nearly a year ago." Zara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Boston, but do you have her address there? It's rather urgent that I contact her." "I'm afraid not," he replied. "I purchased the house directly from Mr. Morgan and have no forwarding information." "Perhaps you could inquire at his former place of business?" Zara nodded numbly, thanking him for his time. As the door closed, she stood on the porch, the full weight of her situation crashing down upon her. Night was falling, she was alone in a strange city with almost no money, and her only known relative was 3,000 miles away. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. Then she straightened her shoulders, gripping her suitcase more firmly. She had survived her father's decline, nursed him through his final illness, and escaped forced marriage. She would not be defeated now, but where to go? Hotels were expensive, and respectable boarding houses might not accept a young woman arriving unannounced after dark. As she pondered her options, Zara found herself thinking of Mrs. Henderson's kindness. Perhaps there was someone similar in Denver, someone who could offer guidance to a stranger in need. With no better plan, she began walking toward the lights of the downtown area. Churches often provided assistance, she reasoned, or perhaps there was a ladies' aid society that could direct her to safe lodging for the night. She had gone several blocks when the sound of hoofbeats made her turn. A rider was approaching at a gallop, his form silhouetted against the last light of day. Something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, struck her as familiar. The rider slowed as he neared her, and Zara's heart nearly stopped as recognition dawned. Griffin. She whispered, scarcely believing her eyes. Griffin Garrett pulled his horse to a halt beside her, his expression a mixture of relief and determination. "Miss Valentine," he acknowledged, tipping his hat. "Seems I'm making a habit of finding you at crossroads. How? How did you get to Denver so quickly?" she asked, still stunned by his appearance. "And how did you find me?" Griffin dismounted, leading his horse by the reins as he fell into step beside her. "Took the next train south," he explained. "As for finding you, I asked at the station which direction you'd gone. The cab driver remembered dropping off a young lady matching your description." He glanced at her suitcase, then at their surroundings. "I take it your cousin wasn't home." "She moved to Boston," Zara admitted, too tired to hide her disappointment. "I have nowhere to go." Griffin was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might need more help than just reaching Denver safely. She suggested I check on you, make sure you found your way." Zara felt a surge of gratitude toward the kind boarding house owner, even as suspicion crept in. "Is that the only reason you followed me?" Griffin looked at her directly then, his blue eyes reflecting the glow of a nearby street lamp. "No," he said simply, "it's not." The honesty in his voice stirred something in Zara's chest. "Why then?" "Because in all my years of wandering, I've never met anyone who made me want to stop running." Griffin's admission came quietly, almost reluctantly. "There's something about you, Miss Valentine, something that made me think twice about just riding on to the next town." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Garrett, Griffin," he corrected gently. "Griffin," she amended, the name feeling right on her lips. "I have nothing. No money, no home, no prospects. I'm grateful beyond words for your help, but I can't accept more from you out of pity." "Pity?" Griffin shook his head, a ghost of a smile appearing. "Miss Valentine, Zara, what I feel for you is many things, but pity isn't among them." They had stopped walking now, standing in a pool of lamplight on a quiet Denver street. Griffin's horse nudged his shoulder impatiently, but he paid it no mind, his attention focused entirely on Zara. "I don't make connections easily," he continued, his voice low. "The life I've led doesn't allow for it. But something happened on that train platform in Saint Elmo. Something I can't explain and don't rightly understand, except to know that letting you walk away without making sure you're safe isn't an option for me." Zara studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. She found not only earnest concern and something deeper, something that resonated with her own unexpected feelings. "What do you propose, then?" she asked softly. "Let me help you find proper lodging tonight," Griffin suggested. "Tomorrow we can inquire about your cousin's forwarding address. Denver's a big city with opportunities for educated women. If you decide to stay, I could. Well, I could stay too, for a while." The implication hung in the air between them. Griffin Garrett, the wandering cowboy, was offering to pause his journey for her sake. "And if I wanted to return to Saint Elmo?" Zara found herself asking. Something like hope flickered in Griffin's eyes. "Then I'd escort you back, make sure the Blackburns are well and truly gone, and help you establish yourself there. Mrs. Henderson mentioned she could use assistance with the boarding house. Said you seemed the type who could learn the business quickly." Zara considered this unexpected turn of events. A day ago, she had been desperate to escape Saint Elmo and the threat it represented. Now, with the Blackburns exposed and a potential opportunity awaiting, the small mining town held a different kind of appeal, one with blue eyes and a quiet strength that had twice come to her aid when all seemed lost. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like to see Saint Elmo again." Without the fear of being forced onto a northbound train, Griffin's smile, when it finally emerged fully, transformed his weathered face. "I was hoping you might say that." In that moment, standing beneath the gas lamps of Denver with an uncertain future stretching before them, Zara felt something she hadn't experienced since before her mother's death: hope, bright and undeniable, blooming in her heart like a desert flower after rain. The return journey to Saint Elmo the following day was markedly different from Zara's flight south. Instead of fear and uncertainty, she felt a cautious optimism, heightened by Griffin's steady presence beside her on the train. They spoke little during the trip, both seemingly content to watch the mountain landscape unfold outside their window, yet the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. By the time they arrived at St. Elmo station in the late afternoon, word of their return had somehow preceded them. Mrs. Henderson was waiting on the platform, her round face beaming with pleasure. "I knew you'd bring her back," she said to Griffin, before enveloping Zara in a motherly embrace. "Welcome home, dear, home." The word struck Zara with unexpected force. Could this small mining town where she'd spent less than 2 days truly become her home, the Blackburns? Griffin asked as they walked toward the boarding house. "Gone," Mrs. Henderson confirmed with satisfaction. "Marshal Cooper put them on the eastbound train yesterday with a warning never to return. Seems their contract was indeed a forgery. Your father's signature was nothing like the one on his legitimate business documents, which Cooper found at the bank." Relief washed over Zara. "And Thornton in Leadville denies all knowledge of the scheme," Mrs. Henderson replied, though her tone suggested skepticism. "Claims the Blackburns were acting without his authority. Cooper sent a wire to the Leadville marshal, but without proof of Thornton's involvement, there's little they can do." Griffin's jaw tightened. "Man like that doesn't dirty his own hands, he hires others to do it for him." "Precisely," Mrs. Henderson agreed. "But the important thing is, he's lost interest in pursuing the matter. You're safe now, Zara, safe." Another concept that had seemed foreign just days ago. Zara glanced at Griffin, finding his eyes already on her. Yes, she felt safe with him nearby in a way she hadn't experienced in years. At the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson had prepared a welcoming dinner. Over roast chicken and apple pie, she outlined her proposal. "I'm not getting any younger," the older woman explained, "and this place is becoming too much for me to manage alone. I've been thinking of taking on help, someone who could learn the business and eventually take over when I'm ready to retire." "That's very generous," Zara began, "but I have no experience running a boarding house." Mrs. Henderson waved away her concern. "You're educated and quick-witted. The rest can be learned. I'm offering room, board, and a small salary to start. If things work out, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." It was more than Zara could have hoped for. "I accept," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me this chance." "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Henderson chuckled. "Wait until you've scrubbed a few floors and dealt with difficult guests." As evening settled over St. Elmo, Griffin excused himself, explaining that he needed to check on his horse and collect his belongings from the livery stable where he'd been staying. "Will you come back?" Zara asked, following him onto the porch. Griffin studied her face in the fading light. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," she admitted, surprising herself with her directness. A slow smile spread across Griffin's features. "Then I'll be back." True to his word, Griffin returned an hour later, his saddlebags slung over one shoulder. Mrs. Henderson showed him to a room at the far end of the hallway from Zara's, her expression knowing but her words strictly proper as she reviewed the house rules about male guests. The days that followed established a new rhythm for Zara. Mornings were spent learning the operations of the boarding house, everything from bookkeeping to laundry to menu planning. Afternoons often found her in town, becoming acquainted with the local merchants and the handful of permanent residents who formed the backbone of St. Elmo's community. Griffin, meanwhile, found work at the livery stable. The owner, an aging man named Frank Sullivan, had been looking for help, particularly with breaking the wild horses that local miners occasionally brought down from the mountains. Griffin's experience with horses quickly proved invaluable, and within a week, Sullivan was openly discussing a partnership. Most evenings, Zara, Griffin, and Mrs. Henderson shared dinner together, sometimes joined by other boarders passing through town. After the dishes were cleared, they often sat on the porch if weather permitted, or in the cozy parlor during the frequent mountain thunderstorms. It was during these quiet hours that Zara and Griffin gradually revealed themselves to each other, sharing pieces of their pasts one story at a time. She learned that he had left home at 16 after a bitter dispute with his father, a Texas rancher who had remarried shortly after Griffin's mother died. His stepmother had made life unbearable, and his father had chosen her comfort over his son's well-being. "Haven't been back since," Griffin admitted one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching lightning dance across distant peaks. "First few years, I was too angry. After that, it just got easier to keep moving than to face what I'd left behind." "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked softly. "Leaving, I mean," Griffin considered this. "I regret the way it happened. The words said that can't be taken back, but leaving opened up the world for me in ways staying would have prevented. I've seen the northern lights in Montana, crossed rivers wide as oceans, met people who changed how I see the world." He glanced at her. "Can't regret the path that led me here." In turn, Zara shared the story of her own family, her mother's death from fever when Zara was 15. Her father's decline into gambling and drinking, the years she spent trying to hold their crumbling world together. "I loved him," she explained one rainy afternoon as they sorted linens in the boarding house dining room. "Even when he lost everything, even when he became someone I barely recognized, he was still my father." "That's the hardest kind of love," Griffin observed, his hands stilling on the tablecloth he was folding. "Loving someone who's changing into something you don't understand." "Yes," Zara agreed, touched by his insight. "Exactly that." As summer faded into autumn, something else was growing between them, something neither named, but both recognized in lingering glances and conversations that stretched long into the night. Mrs. Henderson observed their developing relationship with quiet approval, occasionally finding reasons to leave them alone together. On a crisp October afternoon, Griffin invited Zara for a ride into the mountains. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, his usual reserve giving way to boyish enthusiasm. "The aspens have turned golden, and the view is something special." They rode double on Griffin's chestnut gelding, Zara seated before him, hyper-aware of his arms around her as he guided the horse up narrow mountain trails. The air grew thinner as they climbed, the town falling away beneath them until it looked like a collection of children's toys nestled in the valley. Finally, they reached a small clearing at the edge of a cliff. Griffin helped Zara dismount, then secured the horse to a nearby tree. Below them stretched miles of wilderness, a patchwork of green pine and golden aspen, with the thread of a river winding through the valley floor. "It's breathtaking," Zara whispered, afraid speaking too loudly might somehow disturb the perfect beauty before them. "Found it by accident my first time through these parts," Griffin said, standing close beside her. "Been back every time I've passed through Saint Elmo since." They stood in silence for several minutes, absorbing the majesty of the landscape. Then Griffin turned to face her, his expression more serious than usual. "Zara, there's something I need to say." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes," Griffin took a deep breath. "All my life I've been a wanderer, never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. It's served me well enough, but lately I've been thinking there might be more to life than just moving on to the next horizon." He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "I came to Saint Elmo just passing through, planning to head south before winter set in. But then I met you, and for the first time I'm thinking about staying put." Zara searched his face, hardly daring to hope. "What are you saying, Griffin?" "I'm saying I've fallen in love with you," he stated simply, the words hanging clear and true in the mountain air. "I know it hasn't been long, and I don't expect you to feel the same, but I wanted you to know that you've changed something in me, something I thought was fixed in its ways." Zara's breath caught in her throat. She had known her feelings for Griffin were deepening day by day, but hearing him declare his love first was unexpected. In her experience, men were seldom so forthright about matters of the heart. "I do feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid that you would eventually move on as you always have." That one day I would wake up and you would be gone. Griffin's hands tightened around hers. I can't promise I'll never have the urge to see what's beyond the next mountain. But I can promise that if I go, I'll always come back to you if you'll have me. I want that, Zara said, her heart overflowing with emotion. I want you to come back to me always. Griffin's smile lit his entire face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. But when Zara responded, rising onto her toes to meet him more fully, it deepened into something that spoke of longing fulfilled and promises made. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We should head back before dark, Griffin said reluctantly, his eyes never leaving her face. Yes, Zara agreed, equally reluctant to end this perfect moment. Mrs. Henderson will worry. The ride down the mountain was filled with a new awareness of each other. Occasionally, Griffin would press a kiss to the top of Zara's head or her temple, as if unable to believe he now had the right to such gestures. As they approached the boarding house, Zara spotted Mrs. Henderson on the porch with Marshal Cooper. The two were deep in conversation, their expressions grave. Griffin noticed as well, his posture stiffening. Something's wrong, he murmured, urging his horse forward. They dismounted quickly, and Mrs. Henderson rose to meet them, her usually cheerful face drawn with concern. What is it? Zara asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Has something happened? Mrs. Henderson glanced at Marshal Cooper, who stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Got a wire from Denver this afternoon, he explained. Jeremiah Thornton was seen boarding the Northbound train yesterday. Word is he's coming to handle the Valentine matter personally. Zara felt the blood drain from her face. But I thought with the Blackburns gone, Thornton's not the type to let go easily, Cooper continued. Especially now that his reputation's been questioned. The Leadville marshal says he's been telling anyone who'll listen that he was cheated out of a legal contract. Griffin moved protectively closer to Zara. When is he expected to arrive? Tomorrow's morning train, Cooper replied. I'll be at the station to meet him, let him know his presence isn't welcome in Saint Elmo, but I can't legally stop him from getting off the train. And if he refuses to leave? Griffin asked, his voice hard. Cooper sighed. I'm one man with a star, Garrett. Thornton's known to travel with hired guns. I'll do what I can to protect Miss Valentine legally, but his voice trailed off, the implication clear. The law had its limits, especially against a man of Thornton's wealth and influence. Mrs. Henderson touched Zara's arm gently. Perhaps you should consider leaving Saint Elmo until this blows over. I have a sister in Idaho who would welcome you. No, Zara said firmly, surprising herself with her resolve. I'm done running. Saint Elmo is my home now. If Thornton wants to face me, let him come. Griffin nodded, pride evident in his expression. She's right. Running would only convince Thornton he has some legitimate claim on her. Better to stand our ground, Zara repeated softly, grateful for his solidarity. Cooper replaced his hat. I'll do what I can to reason with him when he arrives. In the meantime, I suggest you both stay close to town, safety in numbers and all that. After the marshal left, Mrs. Henderson ushered them inside for a simple supper, though none of them had much appetite. The evening passed tensely, each lost in their own thoughts about what the morning might bring. As they prepared to retire for the night, Griffin pulled Zara aside in the hallway. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said quietly, know that I meant every word I said on the mountain. I love you, Zara Valentine, and I won't let any man take you against your will. Zara reached up to touch his face, drawing comfort from the stubble beneath her fingertips. I know, and I love you too, Griffin Garrett. No matter what comes tomorrow, that won't change. Morning arrived with a sky the color of hammered steel, clouds hanging low over the mountains as if the heavens themselves sensed the approaching confrontation. Zara dressed with particular care in her best dress, a navy blue garment with modest lace at the collar. If she was to face Jeremiah Thornton, she would do so looking every inch the respectable woman she was. Griffin waited for her at the foot of the stairs, similarly attired in his cleanest shirt and vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. The sight of him solid, dependable, ready to stand beside her bolstered Zara's courage. "Ready?" he asked simply. Zara nodded, taking the arm he offered. Together they walked to the train station, arriving well before the northbound train was due. Marshal Cooper was already there, his badge prominently displayed on his chest, his expression grim. "No sign of trouble yet," he reported as they approached. "Trains on schedule should be here in about 20 minutes. Other townspeople began gathering as well, word having spread about the impending arrival. Frank Sullivan from the livery stable positioned himself near Griffin, nodding respectfully to Zara. The general store owner and his wife stood nearby, along with several miners who had come down from their claims. Even the town's doctor hovered at the edge of the platform, his medical bag at his feet. "Quite a welcome committee," Griffin observed dryly. Cooper's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Saint Elmo looks after its own, Garrett. Folks here have taken a shine to Miss Valentine and to you, for that matter. They're not about to let some outsider bully either of you." The show of community support warmed Zara deeply. In just a few months, this town had embraced her more fully than Central City had in all the years she'd lived there. A distant whistle announced the train's approach. Zara felt Griffin's arm tense beneath her hand, though his face remained composed. She drew a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come. The train rounded the bend, steam billowing around it as it slowed to enter the station. When it finally shuddered to a halt, there was a moment of tense silence as everyone watched the passenger cars. The first to disembark were a family with small children, clearly startled by the crowd on the platform. Then came a drummer with his sample cases, followed by two women in traveling clothes. Finally, from the first-class car stepped a tall, elegantly dressed man in his 40s, his silver-streaked black hair visible beneath an expensive hat. Even without the two hard-faced men who flanked him, Zara would have recognized Jeremiah Thornton from the Blackburn's descriptions. He carried himself with the arrogance of wealth, his gaze sweeping the platform with disdain until it settled on her. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something darker. He strode forward purposefully, his companions keeping pace. Marshal Cooper moved to intercept him. "Mr. Thornton, I presume?" "Indeed," Thornton replied coldly. "And you are Marshal Thomas Cooper. I understand you've come to Saint Elmo on business related to Miss Valentine." Thornton's gaze shifted back to Zara. "That's correct. The lady and I have a matter to settle." "There's nothing to settle," Cooper stated firmly. "The contract you claim to hold has been proven a forgery. Miss Valentine has no obligation to you whatsoever." Thornton's expression hardened. "I have witnesses who saw her father sign that document. The fact that his signature looks different from some bank papers proves nothing except that he was likely intoxicated at the time." "Even if that were true," Zara spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt, "a father cannot legally sell his daughter." "I am not property to be traded for a gambling debt." Thornton turned his cold gaze fully on her. "Your father took my money, Miss Valentine. $5,000 is not a trivial sum. Someone must honor that debt." "Her father's dead," Griffin interjected, his tone deceptively calm. "The debt died with him." "And who might you be?" Thornton asked dismissively. "Griffin Garrett, the man who's going to make sure you leave Saint Elmo on the next train south with or without your teeth." One of Thornton's companions moved his hand toward his gun, but Cooper's voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't. Draw that weapon and you'll be dead before it clears leather. This isn't Leadville, Thornton. Your money doesn't mean much here." Thornton assessed the situation, noting the hostile faces surrounding him. For a moment it seemed he might back down, then his expression shifted to one of calculated reasonableness. "Perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot," he said, his tone modulating to something almost conciliatory. "Miss Valentine, I understand your reluctance, but surely we can discuss this matter civilly, like reasonable people. I'm prepared to be generous." "There's nothing to discuss," Zara replied firmly. I have no intention of honoring a fraudulent contract or marrying a man I've never met, especially one who would resort to force and intimidation. Thornton's facade of reasonableness slipped slightly. You're making a grave mistake. I have influence throughout the territory. One word from me and you'll find doors closing wherever you go. Are you threatening her? Griffin's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. Merely stating facts, Thornton replied smoothly. Actions have consequences, Miss Valentine. Your father understood that, even if you don't. Zara felt anger rising within her, not fear, but righteous indignation. My father was a broken man who made terrible choices in his final years, but even at his lowest, he would never have truly sold his daughter. Whatever document you have was obtained through deception or coercion, and I will never honor it. Something ugly flashed in Thornton's eyes. You think you're too good for me, is that it? A penniless orphan turning up her nose at one of the wealthiest men in Leadville. No, Mr. Thornton, Zara responded evenly. I simply believe that marriage should be based on love and mutual respect, not financial transactions. Her gaze shifted briefly to Griffin, drawing strength from his presence. I've found those qualities here in Saint Elmo, with people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. Thornton followed her glance, his expression darkening as he noticed the protective way Griffin stood beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. I see, he said coldly. You've already given yourself to this. Cowboy, is that it? Griffin stepped forward, but Zara placed a restraining hand on his arm. My affections are not something I give to anyone, Mr. Thornton. They're earned through character and decency, qualities you clearly lack. A murmur of approval rippled through the watching townspeople. Thornton's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Mrs. Henderson pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Mr. Thornton, she said, her normally kind voice sharp with disapproval, I've heard quite enough. Miss Valentine is under my protection as a resident of my boarding house and my business associate. Whatever arrangement you believe you had with her father is null and void. If you continue to harass her, I will personally see that every respectable establishment between here and Leadville knows the kind of man you truly are. Thornton stared at the older woman, momentarily taken aback by her fierce defense. His eyes swept the crowd again, noting the solidarity of the gathered townspeople. Even his hired men were shifting uncomfortably, outmatched by the assembled residents. Finally, he forced a cold smile. It seems I've wasted my time coming to this charming little settlement. Very well, Miss Valentine, keep your freedom. But remember, he leaned closer, lowering his voice, a debt unpaid has a way of following you. The only thing following Miss Valentine will be her friends and neighbors, Marshal Cooper interrupted, stepping between them. Now, I believe you have a choice to make, Mr. Thornton. You can board the southbound train that leaves in 15 minutes, or you can spend the night in my jail for disturbing the peace. Which will it be? Thornton straightened his coat with exaggerated dignity. I know when I'm not welcome, Marshal. We'll take the next train. He turned to his companions. Come, gentlemen, there's nothing of value for us here. As Thornton and his men moved away to wait for the southbound train, the tension on the platform gradually dissipated. Townspeople came forward to express their support to Zara, each one reinforcing that she was indeed welcome in Saint Elmo. When the crowd finally dispersed, leaving just Zara, Griffin, and Mrs. Henderson, the older woman embraced Zara warmly. I'm proud of you, my dear, she said, her eyes twinkling. Standing up to a bully like that takes courage. I had help, Zara replied, looking gratefully at Griffin. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. Yes, you did, and speaking of help, I should get back to the boarding house. Those rooms won't clean themselves, she gave them a knowing smile. Take your time coming back, it's a lovely day for a walk. As she bustled away, Griffin took Zara's hand, leading her away from the station. They walked in companionable silence until they reached a small park at the edge of town, where a bench overlooked the valley below. You were magnificent, Griffin said as they sat down. I've seen men with less courage facing down a charging buffalo. Zara laughed softly. I was terrified. But also angry. How dare he think he could buy and sell me like cattle? Some men mistake wealth for worth, Griffin observed. Thornton's the type who believes everything has a price. Not everything, Zara said quietly, looking into his eyes. Some things are beyond price. Griffin's expression softened. He reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the sunlight. I've been carrying this for a week, waiting for the right moment. After what happened today, I don't want to wait any longer. He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. It was my mother's, he explained. The one thing I took when I left home. She made me promise I'd only give it to someone I loved as much as she loved my father. Zara's breath caught as Griffin slid from the bench to one knee before her. Zara Valentine, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but in my heart, I feel I've been looking for you all my life. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears welled in Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly, yes, Griffin, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her, the pearl gleaming softly against her skin. Griffin rose, pulling her to her feet and into his embrace. Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of the vows they would soon make formally before God and their community. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. I was thinking, he said tentatively, that maybe it's time I wrote to my father. Zara looked at him questioningly. After all this time, Griffin nodded. 12 years is a long time to hold on to anger, and I'd like him to know I've found happiness even if he chose a different path for himself. I think that's a wonderful idea, Zara said softly. Perhaps he's changed too. Perhaps, Griffin agreed, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. Either way, I want to start our life together without the shadow of old regrets. As they walked back toward town, hand in hand, the future stretching before them seemed bright with possibility. Saint Elmo, once just another stop on Griffin's endless journey, had become the place where both he and Zara had found not only each other, but also a community and a sense of belonging neither had experienced in years. The northbound train that had once represented fear and loss for Zara was now just another train passing through a town she called home. And the cowboy who had said no on that fateful day would soon say I do in the small church on the hill, binding his life to hers in the presence of friends who had become family. Winter came early to the mountains that year, blanketing Saint Elmo in pristine white by mid-November. The wedding of Griffin Garrett and Zara Valentine was held on the first Sunday of December, with snow still falling gently outside the windows of the whitewashed church. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house, transforming the dining room with evergreen boughs and ribbon. The entire town turned out to celebrate, their genuine affection for the couple evident in every handshake and embrace. Marshall Cooper served as Griffin's best man, while Mrs. Henderson stood up with Zara. The bride wore a gown of cream-colored silk that the women of Saint Elmo had helped her make, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice to match her engagement ring. As they exchanged vows, Zara looked into Griffin's eyes and saw not just the man who had saved her that summer day, but the future they would build together, a future neither could have imagined when fate first brought them to the same train platform. The letter Griffin had sent to his father in Texas received a response just days before the wedding, a brief note expressing surprise at hearing from his son after so many years, and cautious interest in learning more about the woman who had captured his heart. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. Spring found the newlyweds settling into a small house near the edge of town. Griffin had indeed formed a partnership with Frank Sullivan at the livery stable, while Zara continued working with Mrs. Henderson, gradually taking on more responsibility at the boarding house. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Zara placed Griffin's hand over her still flat stomach. I have news, she said softly. Griffin's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Are you certain? Zara nodded, her smile radiant. Dr. Miller confirmed it this morning. We're going to have a baby, Griffin. By Christmas, we'll be a family of 3. The joy that transformed his face was unlike anything she had ever seen, pure, unguarded happiness that made him look younger than his 29 years. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice as he gently caressed her stomach. "Our child." Their kiss was tender, filled with all the love and hope that had blossomed from that first fateful encounter on the train platform. What had begun with a simple no had grown into a lifetime of yes, yes to love, yes to putting down roots, yes to building a future together in the small mountain town that had brought them together. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking softly of their hopes for their child and the years to come. The northbound train whistled in the distance as it approached the station, a sound that no longer brought fear but instead reminded them of how fate had intervened when 2 men tried to force a young woman onto that train, and a cowboy had stood in the doorway and said, "No." In December of that same year, Zara gave birth to a healthy son whom they named James Thomas Garrett, James for Griffin's father, and Thomas for Marshall Cooper, who had stood by them in their time of need. Mrs. Henderson, now officially Grandma Edith to little James, doted on the baby as if he were her own grandson. The boarding house thrived under Zara's increasingly confident management, becoming known throughout Colorado territory as one of the most welcoming establishments for respectable travelers. Griffin's partnership with Frank Sullivan proved equally successful. Their livery stable expanded to include a small horse breeding operation specializing in sturdy mountain stock, well suited to the harsh Colorado environment. As James grew from infant to toddler, Griffin's correspondence with his father in Texas increased in both frequency and warmth. Finally, in the summer of 1885, James Garrett SR made the journey to Saint Elmo to meet his son's family. The reunion was initially awkward, 12 years of silence creating a barrier not easily breached. But the sight of his grandson, a cheerful, dark-haired boy with Griffin's blue eyes, melted the elder Garrett's reserve. By the end of his 2-week visit, he was offering Griffin a partnership in the family ranch, should he ever wish to return to Texas. "The offer's appreciated," Griffin told his father as they sat on the porch of the home he shared with Zara, watching little James toddle about the yard. "But our life is here now. Saint Elmo is home." The elder Garrett nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "I can see why. You've built something good here, son, something worth staying for." It was the closest thing to an apology Griffin would ever receive, but it was enough. The past couldn't be undone, but the future stretched before them, bright with possibility. Over the years that followed, the Garrett family grew to include a daughter, Sarah Edith, born in the spring of 1887. Like her brother, she inherited her father's blue eyes but had her mother's auburn hair and determined spirit. Saint Elmo itself changed with the times. The silver boom eventually waned, but unlike many mining towns that became ghost towns when the ore ran out, Saint Elmo adapted. Its location along the railroad made it a natural stop for travelers, and the boarding house, now officially named Valentine House after Mrs. Henderson, fully retired, became a destination in its own right. Griffin never lost his love of the mountains, often taking his children on rides to his favorite viewpoints when they were old enough to sit a horse. But the wanderlust that had driven him for so many years was satisfied now by occasional hunting trips or cattle drives, always with the certainty of returning to the home and family he cherished. Zara, too, found fulfillment beyond anything she had imagined possible in those dark days after her father's death. The frightened young woman who had fled Central City with nothing but a suitcase and desperate hope had become a respected businesswoman, loving wife, and devoted mother roles she embraced with the same quiet determination that had sustained her through harder times. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Griffin surprised Zara with a trip to Denver, leaving the children in Mrs. Henderson's capable care. They stayed in the finest hotel, attended the theater, and dined in elegant restaurants, a week of luxury neither could have afforded when they first met. On their last evening in the city, they stood on the balcony of their hotel room, gazing at the lights of Denver spread out before them. "Any regrets?" Griffin asked softly, his arms encircling her waist from behind. Zara leaned back against his chest, savoring his warmth in the cool night air. "Not one," she replied truthfully. "Everything that happened, even the difficult parts, led us here. How could I regret that?" Griffin turned her in his arms, studying her face in the moonlight. At 38, he was still handsome, the lines at the corners of his eyes and the touches of gray at his temples only adding character to his weathered features. Zara, too, had changed in the decade since they met. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had only grown as she established herself as a businesswoman and mother. The years had been kind to them both, hardship giving way to prosperity and shared joy. "I love you, Zara Garrett," Griffin said, using the name that still gave her a thrill to hear. "More today than when I first said it on that mountain, if such a thing is possible." "I believe it is," she replied, raising her hand to his cheek. "Love grows, like a tree sending roots deeper and branches higher with each passing season. What we have now is stronger than what we began with." Their kiss was unhurried, a confirmation rather than a discovery. They had weathered storms together, literal mountain blizzards and figurative challenges that tested their resolve. Through it all, the foundation they had built remained solid. When they returned to Saint Elmo, it was with renewed appreciation for the life they had created together. Their children greeted them with exuberant hugs and endless stories of their week with Grandma Edith, while Mrs. Henderson welcomed them home with knowing smiles and a hearty meal. As they settled back into the rhythm of their days, Zara often found herself pausing to marvel at the turns her life had taken. The Northbound train still passed through Saint Elmo regularly, but now it was just another train, carrying passengers and goods to destinations unknown. The fear it had once represented was long gone, replaced by contentment in the present and hope for the future. Griffin, too, seemed at peace in a way he hadn't been when they first met. The restlessness that had driven him from place to place for so many years had transformed into purposeful energy directed toward building a legacy for their children. Together, they watched James and Sarah grow, instilling in them the values they held dear: honesty, compassion, and the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. Like when you stopped those mean men from taking Mama away. Young James asked one evening as Griffin told the story of how they had met. "Exactly like that," Griffin confirmed, ruffling his son's dark hair. "Sometimes one person saying no to something wrong can change everything." "I'm going to be brave like you when I grow up, Papa," James declared with the certainty only a child could possess. Griffin exchanged a smile with Zara over their son's head. "I hope you'll be brave like your mama too," he said softly. "She's the one who had the courage to start over when everything seemed lost." As the years passed, Saint Elmo changed, but the Garrett family remained its heart. James eventually took over the livery business when Frank Sullivan retired, while Sarah, to no one's surprise, showed a natural aptitude for managing Valentine House alongside her mother. Zara and Griffin grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered sorrow's misses. Henderson's peaceful passing in her sleep at the age of 84, Marshall Cooper's death in a hunting accident, and celebrated joys James's marriage to the schoolteacher's daughter, the birth of their grandchildren. Through it all, they remained each other's steadfast companions, as devoted in their silver years as they had been in their youth. On quiet evenings, they still sat on their porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had witnessed their beginning. Sometimes they spoke of the past, marveling at the chain of events that had brought them together. Other times, they sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. And when visitors to Saint Elmo asked about the town's history, locals would often point to the handsome older couple and tell the story of how they met, of two men forcing a young woman onto the Northbound train, and the cowboy who blocked the door and said, "No," changing both their lives forever. It was a story that became part of Saint Elmo's folklore, a testament to how a single moment of courage can alter the course of many lives. For Zara and Griffin Garrett, it was simply the beginning of their story, a love story that continued to unfold in the small mountain town they both called home.